Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third part of Level Up CX Summit, the marketing role of the CX professional, 3B in fact, because we started the day doing this exact webinar for Australia, and here we are today. So to the Summit alumni, if you are returning, I do see some of you, welcome back, and if it is your first time on one of our Summit webinars, welcome to you, great to have you here. My name is Anthony Odler, and I'm going to be your host and admin for today. And before I introduce our speakers, perhaps a little bit of context. So what we've seen is that understanding the new customer mindset continues to be a real challenge for businesses. Customers' behavior, it's neither linear nor orderly, and marketers are having to extend their vision and impact to the full customer journey, thereby increasing their reliance on CX professionals. So what we've done is we've designed this series of events, and we've invited international thought leaders to help us present a blueprint for CX in the new economy, this being part 3 of that presentation. So we started with number 1. Many of you will know that we started by looking at the new customer mindset. We were joined by Leo Arussi. We then looked at better CX decisions with data science, and we were joined by Alistair Douglas from Servin in Australia. Today's obviously the marketing role of the CX professional, and we're going to be wrapping up in late January with customer acquisition, retention, and optimization. There are golden threads that run through all of these events. So try to at least watch if you can. We're going to make sure that you've got the content from the events that have already passed, and we'll make sure that you've got registration details for that which is to come. A little bit of housekeeping before I stop talking is, like many of you, we are also sitting in our homes, so please be understanding if you hear dogs or something like that. There will be a Q&A towards the end, so if you have any questions during the course of this event, please do pop them into the little questions section of the webinar gadget, and we'll try and address those in real time. If not, we'll address them after the fact. And yes, please stick around and we'll make sure that you get the content from today, the slideware as well as the recording. At this point, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Firstly, our guest speaker, Upendra Dharmadhikary. We call him Udi. We're thrilled to have him here from Tech Mahindra Consulting, and he's dialing in from England. Udi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thanks. First of all, thank you for inviting us to join this this morning for some of the folks in US and afternoon in UK. And obviously, it's a pleasure to connect with Mike on this forum. Thank you. I am Upendra Dharmadhikary, and I'm the Vice President for Tech Mahindra Consulting Unit, working on global clients, and very keen to have this conversation on marketing and customer experience.
Brilliant. Thanks, Udi. Looking forward to it. And our own CEO and co-founder, Mike.
And thanks so much for the introduction. As Anthony shared, I'm the CEO and co-founder of inQuba, and I'd like to really just extend my thank you to Upendra. Upendra was up at 2 a.m. this morning. We kicked off at 3 a.m. for our Australian clients and prospects, and again this afternoon. Upendra's based in the UK. We've got an exceptional relationship with Tech Mahindra. We partnered with them at the beginning of this year, the primary focus being North America first, and we've extended that partnership to APAC, South Africa, the UK, and other parts of the world as well. So Upendra, thank you so much for joining us, and if the conversation this afternoon is anything like 3 a.m. in the morning, hopefully a lot better because we're a little bit more awake. I think everyone's in for a treat.
Thanks,
That's great. Thanks, guys. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to exit the conversation at this point. I'll pop up again towards the end. So over to you, Mike.
Brilliant. So what I'd like to do is just set the context for the discussion. Within the context, the first part of the Level 1 CX series focused on the idea of a 90% economy, a world that looks very different in 2020 compared to anything that we've seen before or earlier. And what happened during this year is that there's been an acceleration of the kind of customer that we're dealing with as customer experience professionals. And what we've seen is that if we take a look at any of the research from Forrester or Gartner, these trends are not new. They just happen to accelerate through the COVID period. And when we talk about acceleration, we're talking about a dramatic acceleration, and we come out of 2020 with a customer that came into the year using digital and came out of the year being digital. People really had a good rethink around everything. I know we did it in our household. We spoke to friends, relatives. Everyone really looked at everything again. How do I shop? Where do I shop? Maybe I have a favorite store where we do most of our grocery shopping, because our patterns moved to online and we could directly compare prices. I became much more conscious as to how much more I was paying at this particular store, and my personal shopping, spending behavior has definitely changed, as has consumers around the world. So we're seeing a much more savvy consumer, and someone who can navigate. They become far more comfortable with digital over the course of 2020. Companies are offering far better digital services during the course of this year as well. And the CX fraternity really needs to do what they can and pretty quickly to be able to catch up with this customer if we're going to be effective in managing the customer experience. So there are a number of trends that we've really spotted around this new customer. Next slide, please. And these particular trends are things around what we call capabilities that organizations will really need to have to keep up with this customer. And in many ways, the title of today's presentation around the marketing role of the CX professional, when I reflect on it, doesn't even make sense, because there isn't such a thing as the marketing role of the CX professional. Customers really just see this customer journey or this value chain internally from an organization, and they expect certain things to happen, and when those things don't happen, there are glitches in the matrix and they get upset. The way that we're seeing this pattern manifest on the inside businesses is more so than ever, marketing professionals are now talking to the customer experience team. Customer experience team doesn't have all the data around all the questions that are being answered, and they're going to the BI team, and we're seeing almost like this triage happening between the customer experience professional, the marketing team, and the BI team to come up with the right answers and the right strategies for the business. The things and the areas that we're seeing fall into really three key capabilities. The first one being the new customer mindset. So how do we understand this customer mindset, which is moving quicker than ever before? The next one being retention. All our customers are talking about retention. So they'll come at it from different angles. Maybe retention. Should we be improving the customer experience? Should we be improving the journey? What do we need to do? Why do customers leave? And we've done some very interesting projects during the COVID period and also pre-COVID. And one of the things that we've seen, which is a result that CX professionals will not want to hear, is that on acquisition journeys, we were able to increase certain acquisition journeys by 100% at multiple points. And when we measured the NPS score of the people where we increased it 100% and ones where we didn't have any change, so we did A/B testing against them, the NPS scores were almost identical. There was a slight change in sentiment. So what that result is telling us is that the role of a CX professional is far broader. If you want to get your customers to a particular point, you want them to behave in a particular way, you want to offer them that great experience, NPS or CSAT only goes so far. There's a lot more to these particular journeys. The fourth thing that we spoke about in the Level 2 CX Summit was really about the whole idea of advanced analytics and AI, because what we're seeing, we talk about catch me if you can. The customers are moving super fast. Organizations are trying to scurry to really understand these, but if you want to really do this in a systemic way, we definitely need the help of computers with machine learning to understand these trends as they happen on the fly, and to be able to manage them on the fly. So that really sets the scene for today's webinar, and we're going to be talking about these three themes that we've spoken about. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is that marketers are, when we talk about customer mindset, when we talk about retention, marketers, that's not marketing territory at all. That's the territory of customer experience managers who understand voice of the customer and customer journeys and so on. So the role of the customer experience professional will definitely lift up within the organization, provided the CX practitioners are doing the work, have the methodologies and have the tools to actually lift the organization up and to provide to provide the insights. And it's not just inQuba pushing this out. We having discussions with customers on a regular basis, and companies are coming to us, particularly over last year, with a far more sophisticated requirement. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today around the three themes that we've spoken about. So the first one being mindset, the next one being retention, and the third one being acquisition. So, Beauty, let's jump into the meat of the webinar being mindset. You've done some fascinating work as the VP of Consulting. You've got global experience around the customer mindset. So maybe you can share some of your thoughts with us around this mindset area.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's fascinating to talk about new customer, and I learn about the customers every day globally with different verticals, and it's quite fascinating what pandemic has done to the customer psyche. And yes, digital, and some of them thought that during the pandemic it would be about customer experience equal to digital experience, but that's not true. We know that when we've got the vaccines announced, hopefully we'll be back onto this multiple channels of interaction with customers. But the new mindset is absolutely kind of getting tested during this this period, the pandemic and post-pandemic period. Still, to look at what was the behavior of the company, the enterprise, during this period, and you know, when they are selling products and services, is it only for their own economic good, or they have a greater purpose? So purpose takes you know, some center stage in 2020. What is the purpose of this organization, and is it authenticity? Is it authentic? So that authenticity topic is quite important, because if what I've seen in this period, Mike, you know, is that many companies have extended themselves to do social purpose, the health services, providing connectivity, you know, going out of their normal enterprise services to provide support to socially challenged people. And those are not the traditional, the so-called charity topics. These are real social purposes where they are combining their products and services, aligning with the social challenges people face, and creating some specific products and services and offering or promotions or specific you know, packages they are offering at this moment. And what I feel the new customer mindset is that you know, look at the purpose of the company, look at the authenticity. What they definitely look for, and I you know, always talk about this as customer experience professionals. We always look at you know, how do we design the customer experience? What's our strategy? And what has evolved is the human-centered design approach. And what I see this year, especially, is that what is the deep empathy that you have cultivated, and that empathy has to be demonstrated through the entire life cycle of customers' interaction with the company. The new mindset needs that when we are creating these positive memories they stay long term. And when you come to a point of, when we will discuss later on, around retention and ongoing relationship with the customers, then these positive memories will evoke the right emotion in the customer to stay. Very important. New mindset of the customer is looking for the purpose of the company, looking for the authenticity of the company. Some of the customers are just looking for deals to reduce their cost, because that's what they've gone through in the pandemic. Their purse strings are under pressure, their wallet is under pressure, but they are looking for options where they get safety nets, they get the support structure around that company, and not kind of just go for a cheap option. And it's important that whether it be a bank, an investment company, or a telecom provider that we work with, is to look at these analysis of the customers, voice of customer, and be able to arrange them around these topics to really, for us, learn about the customers. And this learning is quite important, but the insights that you get from learning have to be adapted, and actionable insights are quite critical in this mindset. Yeah,
so Yuri, one of the things that I saw, particularly over the pandemic period, which I was so impressed with, is how quickly companies actually adapted. I know my insurer offered a pay reduction, and you can't just do that. You have to have actuaries behind that. They did that super quickly. A whole lot of companies, when I started ordering online, it was awful, and then 6 weeks later it was really, really good. And so what we saw was a lot of goodwill happening then. And I like to talk about it as the humanizing of companies, because all of a sudden, the employees couldn't be hide behind the brand. Everyone was on Zoom, and there was a lot of global goodwill that was happening, and the brand almost dropped, and people could see the human beings behind it. So I think a lot of good from, let's say, a human interaction perspective happened over the period. But the question we ask is, well, that's all good and great, but it's how can you scale this? And we often talk about scaling empathy, and what I'd like to do is just share a case study briefly with the audience. This whole idea of, if we're talking about mindset, how do you scale this? And just move on to the next slide. The idea that we actually are working with one of our clients, they're in the investment products, retirement annuities, life insurance business, and we working with them on a project which is super interesting. When we approached them, we said, well, share with us really what you want to do. And they spoke about how they want their customers to feel, and they shared that they want their customers to be knowledgeable about the investment space that they're investing in. They want their customers to have assurance around access to information around their particular investment products and how those products are performing. They have this idea of equipping beyond product and developing long-term relationships. And I think if you speak to companies across investment, you'll find the same kind of ideas coming up. But where the ideas run dry is that these are ideas, when we take a look at the execution, what we find is that these things work separately. So we see the intention of where the company wants to take their customers. We see the tools. We do an audit of the tools. Well, what tools do you have? Do you have a portal? Do you have an app? How does your engagement strategy work? And when we look at it and we actually map it to the journey, we see that these things are, that's usually heavily unorchestrated. So the messages are often being sent from the operational systems. The CX team is running a separate CX program. So the way that we've designed this is actually not to look across the columns. We look down, across the journey. We actually want to look at the columns. We want to look at it vertically going down, and we group these things into sprints. And you can see in that first column where it says onboarding, We then pinpointed to say, at the end of the onboarding experience, what emotion do you want the customers to have? So instead of surveying people just randomly at the end and saying, well, this is what we want them to do, the role of the CX professional as marketers is to shape the experience so that when you get there, it's intentional, it's not after the thought. You're actually shaping the experience and guiding the organization in shaping that particular experience. So if we want people to be knowledgeable and understanding following onboarding, the kind of things that we would need very good engagements to be able to do that, and we'd need to be able to have A/B test scripts to say, well, if we're designing those things and people are getting these particular engagements, then are these engagements effective? Are people reading them? Do they resonate? Are we surveying to say, was this communication useful? Are we feeding that back to the marketers to say, well, you have this intention, but your engagements aren't working. So with the methodology, with the tools that we now have, we're able to do this. And the key point around this slide for CX professionals is start working down the columns and start working in what we call sprints. So very deliberate projects that are typically in the region of 6 to 8 weeks, where you're trying to do something at a point in the journey, you're getting the data for that point in the journey, and then you're getting a result around that particular sprint, and then moving on to the next sprint. So what I'd like to do is to move on to the next theme, which is retention. And Yuri, maybe I'm going to hand back to you, and if you can actually share with us some of the global trends you're seeing there.
Yeah, absolutely. This is quite interesting. During the pandemic, what is important that you retain your customers. And like you said in the previous section, getting all the information across all channels about existing customers is at least a little bit easier than prospects where we don't have information about them. But hey, still a lot of companies have got silos of their systems and are not able to get a consistent, I call it the omni-channel experience inputs. If a customer called on a phone number and then went on a website, or went on the website, couldn't find anything that can resolve their issues, and then called you, and you missed a trick that you are actually at the same time sending an offer which is not taking into consideration their issues, then your offer is not going to succeed as much as you would like to. And being able to send offers. I mean, I was giving an example to a customer in Germany very recently and said, I walked out of a store with a brand new phone and a new watch. And when I reach home, there is a email and a text offer from the same company for a new Apple Watch. And I said, don't you know I just bought it from you? I mean, just don't send these marketing messages. And I'm like, I have to think, really, do you know me? I mean, are you doing anything for me special, or it's just like I'm in the sea of your customers? And where is that specialization? Where is that offer? So for retention, it's very important that we have information from where the customer came, from a journey perspective. I've laid down in a value chain customer journey perspective. So when they were exploring your products and services, when they bought, or they're using it, they're paying for it, what has been the experience all along? What are the emotions that we have evoked across this journey through all the transactions that happened and the brand experience that came through? And yes, I would look for segmenting these customers and say that, okay, from a enterprise perspective, put them in some segment category and say these are the type of customers based on different criteria as the traditional marketing goes. And like you said, we put some A/B testing and all kinds of traditional marketing inputs. But very important, what has changed is also all the social feed that's coming. So blend that data, get some artificial intelligence inputs to say that whether this will succeed as a campaign, as an offer, as a specialized offer to that customer. How do I get the next best offer so that I can retain the customer especially if you start that just during the time of renewal of a contract for say a pension, for an insurance, for your contract for a home loan, mortgage, or what you have. It's too late. So it has to be timed properly quite early, and it has to be like, yes, it has been personalized for you, so you feel special. And if it is like if they had offered me for example, instead of the same Apple Watch, advertisement, instead of that, if they had offered me that, okay, we know that you have already an Apple Watch and you've just bought this and you bought this, why don't you also buy this? Which could enhance the overall experience for you, kind of packaging it in a journey perspective, and from a life cycle stage perspective, it's quite important to see how do I get proper support. And like Mike, we work together. Let's share a case study around this from your side as well.
So, Yudi, thanks so much for that. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I'll say something very bold, which 4 years ago in Australia, if I had said this, I think they would have thrown me out the room. Customer experience professionals are putting a huge amount of activity into solving the wrong problem today. And in 2020, the customers expect great touch points. They expect it. It's table stakes. It's a hygiene factor and a qualifier to the game, to doing what companies do. We've conducted some research recently with around retention, and it was for a particular customer. And when we asked a customer in the financial services arena, when we asked why people left, we interviewed several hundred customers, why they left. Very few of them said because the customer experience wasn't good enough, or I phoned your call center and the agent was rude, or so on and so on. Those things are table stakes. Customer experience professionals and organizations have to get those things right. We had a fascinating session with one of our telco customers earlier today, and something that the person who manages the value chain shared something so interesting. And what he said was that the customer experience actually lies between the cracks in the journey, not in the touch points. And they've done a lot of work around really getting their touch points working a whole lot better without seeing a big jump in their promoter score. And they've identified themselves that the secret to pushing that further lies in the journey. And it's exactly, Yudi, what you're talking about, this context. How do we create context, and how do we, if you can't create context, you cannot create a great customer experience, because you may have just bought that Apple Watch, or you could be a long-standing customer that you've been with someone for 15 years, and you're not being treated in a particular way. You're being treated as if you've just become a customer. So the question we want to ask around creating context, and this is a super tough question, is what is saying the right thing to the right person at the right time? How do we say the right thing to the right person at the right time? So the first thing we have to do in step one of this is saying, and Yudi, you spoke about this, is who are these people? If there is a threat of retention, we want to capture that way before. We want to understand why people leave, and that's why we actually did the research. We identified at-risk customers, and then we said, we surveyed those at-risk customers, and we said, well, tell us why you left, or if they were planning to leave because they were identified at high risk. We asked the question another way, and we came up with categories. And what we're seeing is that those categories are often environmental. It can be around affordability. It can be around product performance. It can be around a broader context, a competitive reason, or another competitor is offering something better. So we have to be able to understand those segments in a human way to say, well, this group of people behaves in this particular way. And if we give let's call it a pandemic example, we saw clusters in the analysis of people who simply could not afford that particular product. And they may be able to afford another product, or maybe there was a payment holiday that could be applied there, which is very different to a customer who's marginal, who can afford it, but they're questioning the value. And we saw that that cluster of customers as well. And the messaging to the groups is very, very different. And it's so important for that messaging to be on point. And that leads us to point 2. And point 2 is, what kind of treatment or communications do we design into the journey for these customers? And we've had a slide very on in inQuba. It was one of the first slides when we started the company 10 years ago. Well, what's a great customer experience? And it was 2 arrows pointing to each other. It says customers have an expectation, and then there's delivery. And when the 2 of these things meet, then you have a great experience. So what we're seeing is that it's not always about fixing the delivery. A lot of it is about fixing the expectation. So in investment, for example, if a client is in a low risk, low return investment and they don't understand that, and they're comparing it to high flyers on the stock exchange type of investment, then obviously that client will be disappointed. And we've seen so much about creating expectation, whether you're waiting for a supplier to come to fix your roof because it's been raining heavy and there's been a claim that's gone in there, or whether it's something else. So much is about communication, setting the expectation during the journey and delivering. And then the third point is really around timing. When do we actually put these things in? So if we can move to the next slide. What we've seen is that these journeys, when we map them out, and with inQuba's new journey products, we digitize these journeys and we map them out, and we come out with journeys that look like this. And we're seeing that these journeys are often hellishly complex. So it's not a trivial exercise to say, well, where do we communicate with customers? So if we can move to the next slide. The way that we build this out is we first map out the journey. We then see if there's shapes or patterns in the journey that are visually obvious, that people are dropping off at this point. Then we can survey them and say, why are you dropping off? But what we're seeing during step 1 is that the patterns on such complex journeys don't always auto-reveal themselves visually. We have to use machine learning to understand the variables that are the lead features. So what are the features? We can't see them visibly with the naked eye. We need to understand these features, and machine learning is really, really good at seeing things that human beings can't see and bring these things to the fore. We then augment that particular information either by following the journey path or identifying those customers, and directly from the platform, we survey just that group of customers to augment the information. It's no good for us just to know that someone is high risk and high value, for example. We want to know what's sitting behind that person. We want to get to know that customer, that human being. The second step is designing the communications, or not just communications, the entire orchestration strategy, journey orchestration strategy for that particular segment. And then the third step is really working on the timing, and the timing is key. We use A/B testing there, and we also take a look at drop-off analysis. So if it's let's say someone's paying premiums, or they have a monthly payment for a mobile contract, what we want to do is we want to say, when are the key points when that segment or that cluster would drop off, because that's a point. Prior to that point is a point we need to start communicating with them. So that's a basic framework we're using, the methodology and the tool set for the retention problem. The one thing that we have seen is that it is a very complex problem, and senior executives who have been at these organizations for a long time are approaching us and saying, we get data from all different sides of the organization. We do not understand why customers leave. And we really believe that journey, and we're seeing the results, that journey unlocks the solution to really understanding and managing retention. So what I'd like to do is to move on to the last area and hand over back to you, Yudi, on acquisition and conversion.
Absolutely. And Mike, we always discuss about this topic, you know, how much can a company retain and continue to have cross-sell, upsell on existing customers, and how much the company should be attempting during, especially during this pandemic time and in 2021 on customer acquisition and conversion. And what we see that the approaches have to change with the mindset. So if the new mindset is more digital, about empathy, about purpose, about social, you know, all of those aspects. I mean, some new customers would actually even put how much you are contributing to the environment, you know, in terms of you know, options for saving the earth and those kind of topics. Yeah. So absolutely, it's very important to have the understanding, the characteristics, the personalities. The amount of data that is available through systems and the various analysis techniques now allows us to understand motivations of individuals. We can go through a lot of this from a sort of segmentation standpoint for any enterprise, but it's very important that we are trying to kind of create the right level of persona in a demographic, in a segment, and try to use the human-centered design approach to kind of have, okay, what should be the customer experience for a new customer? How do we attract them? So once you've got the lead, the second part is about conversion. And that's sometimes challenging because there are various dimensions on the decisioning that a customer takes. And also very important to look at the life stage. And I have a theory here that, you know, the baby boomers or that kind of, you know, pandemic impact would mean a different breed of, I call it the COVID parents. Yeah. And that's kind of a new segment as we've not done it for some decades almost. And that those macro and micro kind of situations have to be taken into account. What changes is that it's important to look at human behavior, not just doing numbers for the sake of trying as customer experience professional, marketing professionals to convert the lead, but actually look at the human behavior and emotions that we are trying to strike with them. And in all of this, the most important thing is the insights that we need, the insights that will help us to give the right experience, so that our customers make the decision to convert and, you know, buy the products and services that we are looking for enterprise to sell. And it's always great to work with you on this, Mike, because you know, what inQuba offers is supporting all of this, you know, in terms of understanding the flow and bringing the insights right to the fore to make the informed decisions. I call it the actionable insights. Very important.
Well, Yudi, we've had some great customer discussions with Tech M around these exact problems. So what I'd like to do is to make this real for the audience today and briefly run through a retail bank case study. This case study has become so effective that we've almost packaged it because we know what the results yield when using a methodology. And what we've done, and just really talking to your particular points, when we ask customers if they're doing, or prospects if they're doing journey mapping, they always say yes. And then when we dig deeper, we go and we look at the journey map, and it's typically the icing, that gray icing that you see on the top of the cake. So, well, how does this customer journey work? Well, the customer applies for a credit card, the customer accepts a quote, customer receives a card, and then they activate and spend. So we say, well, that's great. Let's see your data, and we take the data and we digitize it into journey flows. And what we see is that 80 to 90% of the flow actually happens below the icing, or if you take the iceberg example as well, it's a part that sits beneath the ocean, and that's activity in an area where you don't want your customers to be, but 80 to 90% of the activity happens there. So what we do is we actually map those flows. So things like a customer applies for credit card, application incomplete, or customer accepts a quote, documents outstanding, or customer receives card, no spend after activation. These are real world problems, and all of our customers, this is where the action's happening. We then take a look at the store points, and the platform, the idea of the platform is you say, I want more data, and you say, you hit, I want more data at this particular point, and then it generates a survey, but just to the group of customers that are flowing through that particular journey point. And we get data coming back, and we call this approach dynamic CX or dynamic customer experience, which changes from a conventional CX program in that we're doing very, very niche insights into a group of people who've traversed the journey, who have a very particular problem, like a quote pending. And we say to that group of people, well, you asked for a quote, we sent you that particular quote, but you haven't taken up the quote. Tell us why. And we come up with those particular reasons, and we then design nudges or interventions together with our customer, and we do A/B testing to see if those things are effective, but they're highly targeted. The results from this approach and methodology are staggering. If we take a look at the results, this is from one of the customers we've been working with, and we see at each of the points, card activation, initiate spend, and not taken up. Using this approach, we've been able to double the level of conversion during acquisition. Doubling, when you say 100%, it sounds like a big result, but the point is that often you're only getting 8% conversion. So moving from 8% to 16% is doubling, and it's wonderful, but we often working with a very low base. So what I'd like to move on to is the last part of the webinar before final thoughts and Q&A is to be able to do this. What we've seen is we need a new methodology for CX professionals, and there's currently two really broad methodologies that are being used. The traditional one for an enterprise CX program, where you do a lot of design work, you design almost a static journey, you do your experiences and your episodes and your touch points, you design surveying around that, and you then plan on running that for 2 years or 3 years, maybe with some changes. We believe that that methodology over time will be phased out, because all the things that we've spoken about today, that methodology is not agile, it doesn't do journey mapping, and it doesn't provide the level of insights and tools and orchestration ability that journey will. However, we have customers who are obviously running both. They're running the enterprise CX program methodology, but they're now branching into journey to say, well, we're getting this broad-based feedback, we're managing it at a macro level, but we want to deep dive into very specific journeys. And that was the exact discussion that we had with the telco company earlier today, where they said, here are 3 problematic journeys, and we really want to fix these journeys, are high volume journeys, but we need to understand the end-to-end journey. So what we do is, as you said, Yudi, we discover purpose-driven journeys. We use that human-centric approach. We use design thinking in a very open way, untechnical way. What do you want for your customers? If you place your customer at the center, what is the customer experience around this, and where do you want to get your customer to? What is the goal? What is the customer goal? What is the customer trying to do? And what are you trying to do as an organization? The second thing we then do is, once we've digitized the data and the goals in step 1, we want to understand, well, what are the customer emotions, not at a touch point level, not at an experience level as like a CX program, but at a journey level. As a customer traverses through this journey, let's say they're buying a product from a telco, they're buying a mobile product, they're activating the product. You want to see the full flow as they go through these steps. What is that flow at a customer level, where you're tracking that particular customer, and you want to get feedback from that customer around their whole journey. We then overlay the emotions onto the journey, and we've got analytics that combine customer data, experiential data, the journey data, and the emotional data, and that gives us all the dimensions that we need at that point to have a 360-degree view to say, well, these customers got to this point in the journey. We've only got feedback from these customers. How do we manage these particular customers? Step 4 is designing interventions and nudges. And they take a number of forms. The first one is what we call the digital nudge, which is like a power packet of marketing that you shoot out to your customer. And we know that that's going to be highly effective because we do A/B testing and we see if it shapes customer perception or behavior at that particular point. And if it doesn't, then we take out that particular intervention. The second kind of intervention is what we call a human intervention. And that is where we generate a case or case management. If someone's trying to do something and the thing happens to be quite complex, they may need a human being to help them out. And our customers are setting up like these micro triage centers where you can break out of a process and bring the person back into the process with like a SWAT team sitting on top of the process. The third kind of way is a process intervention where you say, well, this process is just not working in a particular way. We need to redesign the process. There are other kinds of interventions. I'm not going to run through all of them. I just wanted to touch on the way that those interventions kind of play out. And then the fifth one is this whole idea of optimization. So when we look at the cycle, we work in a 6-week sprint, and then we say, do we want to repeat that sprint and optimize further, or have we done enough work here that we're happy that this is working, orchestrations are working, and we can move on to the next journey? So just touching on the tools that we have for that. It's a new toolkit. It's what we call the Journey Cloud, and it's a highly agile toolkit to do all of the things that we've been talking about. And if we go to step 1, the first thing that we want to do in any kind of journey work to solve these kinds of problems is we want to be able to digitize the journey. And I'm talking about not journey mapping. What you see here is auto-generated based on data signals called transactions that come from your data as the customer. And the software auto-generates these journeys. We can see the thickness of the line is how many people traverse that particular journey path. We can see the channels, whether it was web, branch, or agent. It's not showing on this particular diagram, but we can also see things like drop-off points, which are showing. We can see stall points as well. And in the real software, we can mouse over to get a whole lot of additional insight as to what is happening. The second thing that we do is directly from the software, we can highlight any of those particular journey paths. So we can take that purple journey path, for example, and say, well, that journey path is not where we want customers to go. And what we want to do is we want to auto-generate a survey using Dynamic CX. So it will generate a survey particular for that customer around every journey point that they've been through with that intelligence, Yudi, that you're talking about, to say, when you bought your Apple phone, this happened. When you phoned for service, not some general kind of survey, that will be a journey-based survey at the end of that particular journey, which is a deep insight into that particular journey. The third thing that we want to do is the overlay, and that's where the analytics happen, where we take all of the data, the journey path, the customer data, the emotional context, and any other data that we've collected, and we use analytics to take a look at what is happening. And we also use machine learning there. If we can't visually see the pattern, machine learning is really powerful in sharing that pattern with us. Step 4 is designing the orchestrations. And step 5 is seeing how we did, running the A/B testing and starting again. So we really are seeing the beginning of the, let's call it CX 2.0. And we almost have to invent titles like the marketing role of the CX professional. But it's not really the marketing role of a CX professional. It's actually how an organization can orchestrate effectively with marketers, CX people, BI people, and business people working in tandem to really understand the customer and these particular journeys, and to be able to orchestrate the journeys effectively with context from these particular flows. So I am spot on time. It's 10 to, and I'm going to touch on this, and then Anthony's going to open up for final thoughts and questions. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and customers often come back to us and say, well, we really like this, but it sounds quite complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. So what we've done is we've designed something called Journey Accelerator, which is a 2-hour digital session, because everything is digital in this day and age. And what we do is we do pre-planning. A lot of the work that we've done, we're getting really good at understanding the journeys, and we templatizing the journeys in the core industries that we work. And we do pre-work about, there's pre-work that happens together between TechM and ourselves, analyzing the problem off-site. We then take a look at, in the 2-hour session, we map the journey, we define the customer profiles, we identify the nudging opportunities, we identify the data requirements, and we quantify the ROI, and then we package that really nicely following 2 hours for the customer to actually say, well, here is your journey, an easy way of getting your journey going with the package, that if you're interested, we can take this and turn it into a proposal with a relatively small amount of effort from the customer side. So hand over to Anthony, and just to take away the last part of the session.
Thank you, gents. That was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to us having a meeting maybe the middle of next month where we discuss UD's baby boom that he has predicted. Let's see how that goes. I'd just like to give you guys maybe a minute each for final thoughts. UD, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's been great today to kind of discuss this topic. I think we all are excited to see how we learn very fast about the emerging customer, the new customer, the new mindset that they carry. Also, it's equally important to put the right structure in analyzing, optimizing, but much before that, it's important to use human-centered approach to design them. And between marketing and the customer experience team, and I think I have to say this, one of my German customers recently, I had this topic, and they were both of them in the same kind of meeting room, and they said, how do I manage these 200 plus customer journeys? So you need a customer journey manager who's the third person. I said, no, it's software, use the IT technologies. I think there's a lot of good insights that platform from inQuba offers to actually design and manage this whole portfolio. My final takeaway for all of my colleagues is to look at what I call it as conscious enterprise. So let's make our customers as conscious enterprise who always learn and are focused on delivering the purposeful customer experience with customers.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Yudi. Final thoughts from you, Mike?
So, Ant, I think a thought that pops into my head is we started inQuba a decade ago. It was one of those stories on top of the garage and all of that. And one of the first things myself and Trent Rossini, the co-founder of inQuba, is we actually mapped out this problem, and we came out with a very scribbly diagram with a whole lot of parts and this, and you'll need this and this. And we looked at this problem and thought like, oh gosh, do we actually want to go into this business? And I think what's so exciting is that 10 years later, we've seen the technologies come to the fore. We've seen the understanding, the methodologies come to the fore. But the thing that we really have seen come to the fore in 2020 is the brave new CX professional. And we're starting to see a whole reinvention of what the CX practice and domain is about, and we having these customers step forward and say, well, here is a problem, and we're willing to apply the data, the analytics, the time, the methodology, all of these things in getting something far bigger and far better. So I think we really are at a point where the customer experience industry is really being invented in many ways or reinvented in 2020. I think it's a very exciting time for customer experience professionals. And I think it's an even more exciting time for the customers. We're starting to see all the things that were promised maybe 10 years ago and 10 years ago. Finally, the technologies and the methodologies are actually there to be able to impact your customers in a really intelligent way. So it's a very exciting time for the industry and for customers at this point.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. And thanks again to Yudi. We've got a couple of minutes left and we've got a couple of questions. So let's see how we do. Mike, thank you for this question. It's another Mike. This looks like a question that may require a workshop, but let's have a go at it. I'm in a marketing and a CX role combined. How do you suggest customers are prioritized, if at all? Should it be on spend, or on product verticals, or on social influence?
Okay, so the question is a complex one, but we have an answer. I think what we do is you don't know the answer to that particular question until you digitize your data. Once you digitize your data, you can see the journey flows and you can see which customers are traversing which journeys. And we actually had a product workshop recently this week on optimization, and the answer to that is that as the organization, we like this idea of optimizing based on where most of your revenue is. I know it may sound crass, but we think it's a really good idea, because where most of your revenue is where most of your customers are. So we set the highest level parameter depending on, and you can change it. You can say, I want to optimize this problem based on revenue, or I want to optimize this problem based on most cost-effective path to or channel to serve. So, but underneath that, there will be sub-variables. So under revenue, it could be, well, I want to optimize under revenue, and then social media influences could be your second variable. So the answer is really to have the flexibility to stack those variables in a way around optimizing a problem. We can't share socially whether you know what the social drivers are. If social, doing the right thing, becomes super important for an organization, they can say, we want to optimize this problem around social impact. So I think those things can and will change.
I mean, only thing I would add is that it depends on the context of your company, Mike. If I may say, if your company is trying to be a purposeful organization, then economic good and social good is 50-50. Maybe if you're a charity organization, then you know, it's probably 100% social, and if that's what we are looking at. But when you mention social status, product, etc., it's quite important that it's flexible, and as the context changes, you can drive around and change those decisions. But it's absolutely about the business goals and outcomes we are looking for. And I think I like, Michael, what you said. To differentiate with our Mike's question is to have flexibility in the systems to do this prioritization and be able to provide the experience which goes with empathy as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we actually in discussion with the customer this morning, what we saw is we were pushing around retention and acquisition, and they said, well, our product is great, our pricing is great. If we can improve the journey experience, the retention will improve on its own. So as you say, Yudi, it depends what the drivers are, but you should be able to choose that driver and then optimize around it.
That's great. And Mike, we're obviously happy to chat to you offline about that even more. We're gonna stop there on the questions. Mike, would you like to land for us?
Great. So this is part 3 of the series. It's gone incredibly well. We've delighted with the attendance. On each one, we seem to get a growing audience around the series. So I think one of the things I would like to ask the audience is if you can mail through for the fourth one in the series, if there is anything in particular that we haven't covered, we have some flexibility around what we cover and who we interview during the series. So please, that's on the 27th of January, and we would appreciate your feedback. Yudi, I really want to thank you again. I think something that happens through these series is we develop good friendships with the star of the show, and you've just been tremendous to still be smiling and so friendly. And the weather's not even nice there in the UK at the moment. After 2 a.m. wake up just shows the kind of gentleman that you are. And we're delighted to have the privilege to work with you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike, and appreciate the camaraderie. I really appreciate working with you and love that. So enjoyed the session today, and both the sessions, and I would wake up all night to do this again. So thank you, no problem.
That's very kind of you. Thanks, Yudi.
To all our attendees, thank you very much for an hour of your day. We do so appreciate it. Tomorrow you will see a note come through from us where we're going to ask you for your feedback. Please give us some feedback, because we really want to do these better and better. And that's also an opportunity for you to tell us about January, as Mike said, if you've got anything that you'd like to say. We've heard final thoughts. Thank you to Yudi, thank you to Mike. You guys have been great. It's been very interesting. And to everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.